Peace and Book Club discussion with your sister, Dr. Oya Ma'at, and Brother Everett Winchester. Peace and love to you, Brother Everett. How are you doing tonight, brother?
Blessed to be here, Dr. Ma. Thanks for having me, as usual.
Yes, sir. And I mean, we're combing through the book, Birth of a White Nation. Tonight, family, we will be discussing chapter 3, the Americanization of whites. But before we get started, I wanted to announce that Buck Breaking, another Hidden Colors. Well, yeah, it says from the producer of Hidden Colors. I'm sorry, Buck Breaking from Brother Tariq Nasheed. I thought this was really another installment of Hidden Colors, but it seems like it's its own. Installment, I guess. But Buck Breaking is now available, family. We just premiered it in Baltimore on Friday. It was a beautiful turnout. So again, I would like to thank everyone who came out in the DMV. Brother Everett, we had people from New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Virginia. Somebody came from California. I mean, we had people from all over. I think someone even yelled out Alabama. And wow. and literally, I had worked with the brothers from Reality Speaks, Brother Sundiata and Brother Jabari to put this together at the last minute. So we literally decided to do it like Monday or Tuesday, and we just got the ball rolling. And so the community came out, they supported it. It's a great film, family. So you can go to, I believe it's buckbreaking.com or buckbreakingmovie.com to get your copy. Also, family, I did have like 12 copies left over, and I ended up selling like 4 of those. So I have approximately 8 copies of my own that I can send you. Just send an inbox to me through Facebook. Inbox me on Facebook. Say, Doc, I need a copy of Buck Breaking. I'll ship it right on out to you. Just cash at me $30. Don't worry about the shipping. I'll handle the shipping and I'll send it to you. And if you would like for me to sign it, because there were some people, Brother Everett, say, Dr. Mott, I want you to sign my Buck Breaking. And so if you would like for me to personalize your Buck Breaking film, I'll be more than happy to. All right, Brother Everett. So let's jump into chapter 3, the Americanization of white people. I mean, Brother Everett, when I thought about this, it was 2 things when I read this chapter that I walked away with. I walked away with one, that, right now, when you look at the dominance hierarchy, the white male or the Anglo-Saxon male is at the top, but it was all by design. And it was through the aiding of law. It was law and policies and practices made the Anglo-Saxon male, the white male, the European male, he's at the top of the dominance hierarchy when it comes to males. And so putting Black or African males at the bottom, all of this stuff was by design. And it was policies and practices that were implemented to ensure that the white man was the patriarchal authority, had all the patriarchal authority and power. That's number one. The second thing that I walked away with is that when you think about America, she drilled this in. American equals whiteness. She said it's the same. She said with white folks, even if some of them aren't even from America, she said some of them may be from Ireland and Italy and different places. People will view them as an American faster than they would view you and I, who've been here, for 400 and 500 years, as an American. So she said, to be an American means to be white. And so those were the 2 things that I really, really walked away from this chapter, and how law was used to create these conditions. In the laws that I'm talking about, she mentioned the naturalization law of 1790 and the immigration laws and acts that were passed that shaped, the American equals whiteness ideology. But brother Everett, what were your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I haven't learned so many laws. I've learned more laws than I've ever learned reading this book. It was really interesting how she gets into just the whole psychological effect that white people think. I think it was as she started with historian Ronald Takaki and how he was driving in a cab. He's been in America. I think he was born in America, I think he said, and his family's been here for over 100 years. But the cab driver was like, "So where are you from?" And he's from America. I guess he got that weird vibe, like as if, I'm not American. So you can imagine how they look at Black people being over here as if we're not supposed to be here. So yeah, so many laws that's passed that she gets into in the first and second chapter, and definitely in the third chapter. She really gets in not only about laws that affected Black people, but other immigrants that came over, Chinese, Japanese, and things of that nature. So it was really powerful how she broke that down.
Absolutely. And I love how she compared, like, you know, in the beginning chapters, like in the intro, even in chapter 1 and 2, she talked about miscegenation and how she compared the anti-miscegenation laws to the naturalization law. And when she's in, this is the comparison that she made. She said anti-miscegenation law enforced human differences through the constitution of families. So remember, you know, there were differences. So it's like, okay, only European women could only mate with and procreate with and establish families with European males. Well, European women could only do that with European males, and you know, African males had to, you know, find a woman of their own. So she said they, you know, through the anti-miscegenations, they were able to establish, you know, human difference through the constitution of families that were made separate and distinct, while naturalization law worked to make communities of people separate and distinct. And so I thought that was very powerful. Again, just showing how the law was used to create divisions between, you know, African people and European people. Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Brother Everett?
Oh no, you're 100% on point with it. I like how she breaks down how what naturalization laws are. When she talks about it separates from a person that's pretty much a white Protestant type person in reference to someone that might be Italian or something like that. So she goes into a little bit of how they weren't even considered pure whites at that time, and how the laws, you know, separated them. So yeah, you're dead on with that. It's just powerful how white America used the laws to just change things drastically and right away. It was like, it seems like if there was an issue or a problem, let's go create a law and let's put that in effect to empower us. Yep.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at page, I think this is page 55, when she quotes T.H. Marshall and T.H. Marshall's description of full citizenship. And she said to have full citizenship here in the United States, he said full citizenship has 3 components: civil, political, and social rights. Mm-hmm. And Brother Everett, when I read that, I just thought about how we were excluded from all of these rights. So it says right here, according to Marshall, civil citizenship consists of those rights that enable individual freedom, such as liberty of the person, freedom of speech and religion, intellectual pursuit, the right to contract and to own property, and the right to justice. And literally, Black people today in the 21st century are still being denied our civil citizenship. So we've had all the civil rights marches, right, in the 1950s and 1960s. Mm-hmm. We've even had civil rights put on the books during the Reconstruction era, and she talks about that as well. But yet and still, our civil liberties, our civil citizenship is still being denied here in the 21st century. Then T.H. Marshall also talks about political citizenship and how that consists of the right to engage in the political process, either as a member of the political body or an elector of those who make up that political body. Think about this, Brother Everett. When we started voting and participating in the political process, we didn't have our own political party that represented our interests. It's kind of like once we were emancipated and we began getting the right to vote and things of that nature, it was, okay, well, we're going to, initially Black folks were Republicans. A lot of people don't even know that political history. Initially, Black folks were Republicans. And later on, when Roosevelt came with the New Deal, presented the New Deal during the Depression, then Black folks switched from Republicans to Democrats. But we never formed a political party of our own where we elected our own political candidates and we pushed them to get into office. It's kind of like we're like giving candidates. So it's kind of like, here's someone from the Democratic Party, here's someone from the, Republican Party. And then we have to choose between their political candidates. And to be honest with you, even if all of Black America voted for one particular candidate, because white folks possess what Dr. Claude Anderson calls a population monopoly, if the majority of them vote for someone, they're going to get who they want because they outnumber
Right.
us anyway. And so
Right.
again, to me, I feel like that's an example of, you know, our political citizenship or political citizenship to some degree still being denied. And then lastly, T.H. Marshall describes social citizenship. And he says that social citizenship consists of a wide range of rights, including a measure of economic welfare and security. Well, right now they say 48% of Black single mothers live in poverty. They say 50 to 51% of Black people live at or below the poverty line. So what kind of economic welfare and security do Black people have, you know, in America? You know, a lot of people will look and say, oh, we got Jay-Z. He's a Black billionaire. We have Oprah and we have this. But Dr. Michelle Alexander tells us in her book, The New Jim Crow, that is Black exceptionalism. That's not the norm. You know, the average, I think the average or medium income of Black people in America is like $16,000 to $17,000, something to that effect. You know, and so social citizenship consists of a wide range of rights, including a measure of economic welfare and security, to the right to fully participate in the social heritage in the civilized life as measured by the prevailing social standards, you know. And so to me, I still feel like, you know, we're still denied social citizenship. So what are your thoughts, brother Everett?
You know, I want to go into that. That was a powerful insert that you just read, Dr. Ma, but it was something that stood out to me when I was reading it, when he starts to talk about, you know, some of the rights and freedoms. And he mentioned something that stuck out to me: intellectual pursuit. And I think that's real powerful, because we weren't allowed to learn. We weren't allowed to read and write. Now, we're not even talking about our own culture. We can't even learn the white man's culture. And now we're not even able to talk about our own culture. I think that stood out to me more than anything, that we didn't have that freedom of intellectual pursuit. We're going on with the other things that you mentioned. So I just wanted to add that in there. How can you allow a person not to be able to learn their own culture, and not even your culture, to strip them of everything just to be idiotic to a certain degree? How we overcame that is, it shows our strength and character and power. But just to live in those days, not being able to buy land and be a slave, and not to even be able to learn, it's just mind baffling to me.
No, I mean, I completely concur with what you just said. And just, I mean, you know, even today, I mean, to some degree, you know, we're still denied that. I know that, you know, we're still denied that. Who shapes the curriculum that's being taught to our children? You know, we're not in charge of the curriculum. And right now, a lot of teachers, a lot of, you know, Black African teachers are fighting for, you know, what we're calling equity in education. Equity in education, being able to insert ourselves, you know, we want a curriculum that's going to empower all of our children, right? But right now, this curriculum is really empowering white children when you think about it. And so, you know, and so we're still fighting that fight for intellectual pursuit. But I'm on page 56 now, and I have a little note in here that talks about how white men became the alpha male. And it says, much like anti-miscegenation law, U.S. naturalization law influenced women's relationality by rendering white males citizens of the U.S. She's saying basically here in this paragraph, without reading everything, she's saying that the law made white males the most desirable. You know, and she says that it served to advance the commitment to a distinctly white patriarchy. So they made, literally, the law made the European male the top dog by law. And by law, they systematically broke other men who came to America, broke them down. You broke down the African man. You broke him down. Then you broke down the Chinese man. Then you broke down the Japanese man. Then you broke down the Filipino man. Then you broke down any man that wasn't deemed white. You made sure that he was denied citizenship And she tells us that the benefits of citizenship is having access and mobility and influence. And so if you deny someone citizenship, then you're denying them access, you're denying them mobility, and you're denying them influence. And so the law was created. Laws were created to ensure that there was only one man in this system, and he wasn't black. And that's what the law ensured. And so anyway, I know that she moves on to talking about race. And I love this quote at the beginning of the section entitled U.S. Capitalism and White Only Access to Naturalization. She says that Barbara Fields has long called upon us to do this. Explain race, because race explains nothing. It explains nothing.
That's right.
And she's 100%. We all bought into it. Oh, this is my race. This is my race. You know, this is my race. This is my race. No. Race is what they're doing is what it is a categorization of human populations, and people are being grouped according to phenotype. That's all it is. It's a social construct. It's made up, you know, and a lot of us were just duped, Brother Everett. But what do you want to add to that, brother?
And it goes back to that Bacon's Rebellion, because she consistently says it right under what you were reading, Dr. Maad. Poor white laborers to manage and oversee bond laborers of African descent. So it all goes back to, she always kind of goes back to that point where, you know, the indentured servants that were Africans and that were white people fought and rebelled against the system, and how they split them up. And now you got poor white laborers overseeing black people. And I think that's just very critical of how they just start breaking down classes. You know, it's just very important of how this whole white concept began.
And then check this out. She says the ideology of difference became the ideology of race. But no, brother, just to speak to your point, absolutely. What were your thoughts about this quote on page 57? Noel Ignate, I'm butchering his last name, but Noel, it says, captures the point beautifully. People from Africa were not enslaved because they were black. Rather, they were defined as black because they were enslaved. People from Europe were not superior because they were white. Rather, they were made white because its promise of superiority placated them as low-wage workers. What were your thoughts about that? What were your thoughts on that quote when you read it? What were you thinking?
I just pretty much thought to just how the concept of white. I mean, it just pretty much goes to the fact of how they created these laws to give the concept of white the power to rule and control everything over here, and how it separated us. And she goes into the fact that, you know, white people weren't better than us back then. When we were kind of equals to a certain degree culturally and everything, and how they stripped us of everything and put that whiteness over top of us and makes you feel empowered. You know, if you're a white person, I can go over to America, I won't be on the bottom. You know, I'll be over them. I can survive. It's a little bit, it's some future for me over there. If I'm in British, if I'm a British in Europe or whatever, I'm low because I don't have anything. But I can go over there and I won't be the lowest man. I can get some labor and stuff like that through slavery. So it's just crazy. It's just crazy how in the Naturalization Act of 1790, another law. It's just crazy how they just create these things.
Yeah, and then there's other laws that they create to reinforce those laws. So I'm sitting here looking at the Dred Scott case. I'm on page 58, where she says the non-citizenship status of Black Americans was ultimately decided in 1857 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Dred Scott that Blacks never had been citizens and therefore could never be citizens, finding that even emancipated Blacks were not part of the people, in quotes, brought into existence via the U.S. Constitution, and therefore can claim none of the rights and privileges derived therefrom. So when Black folks run around here and say, oh, the Constitution, I sit there and look at them, Brother Everett, and I say, do you realize that when they wrote the Constitution and they said that we the people, do you realize they weren't thinking about you, fool? I'm talking about literally. Like, I mean, you had Black folk, the Constitution, you know, we're protecting. And I said, these people weren't thinking about you during the Constitution. Our people were still in bondage when the Constitution was written. You think those words apply to you? Those words apply to white men, those men who were considered white. It didn't apply to you. And then there were rules that reiterated this. Like you said, the naturalization law of 1790. And then you have the Dred Scott decision in 1857. And then not only did you have that, you had the Plessy versus Ferguson law, right? That was passed in 1896. Remember, in doing Plessy versus Ferguson, it says it's a case in which the court held that state mandated segregation laws, so the Jim Crow laws, did not violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So it was laws after laws after laws that told you what your position was. I don't want to say is in America. Go ahead, Brother Everett. It seemed like you want to jump in. Go ahead, brother.
No, you was flowing. I was just listening. But when you say that and that people talk about the Constitution, it reminds me of that Will Smith movie. What was it? The Pursuit of Happiness.
Yes.
And he was thinking of like, and it's like that, once you do the research, you find out that wasn't meant for us at all. Like we are in the Constitution is pretty much saying they don't get pursuit of happiness. Every white people can, black people can. It's pretty much not saying it, but it is saying it by the laws that they enacted. So yes, you are completely correct. That Plessy versus Ferguson is an interesting case too. And the fact that this is all going into the Constitution, the founding forefathers and how they keep changing it to make it even worse for black people, makes you realize how we are fighting laws that really aren't made for us today. That's go ahead, Dr. Mott.
No, and I know keep going, brother. I'm listening to you. Keep going. You said laws that weren't really. Keep going, brother.
Right. We have you see us boycotting, or I say marching and things of that nature, saying how, this isn't fair and the laws aren't protecting us, but the laws weren't made for us. In the Constitution, these laws weren't made for us. This book educated me and is educating me so much on how these laws were directly impacting black people and empowering white people. So now I have to really start thinking every time I see a law or, a police shoots down a black person or what have you, I'm thinking it is acceptable according to these laws that were written in the Constitution. They may have changed it to a certain degree, but we are still slaves in a lot of ways because of the laws, and they may change it and reword it, but those laws weren't meant for us, and they're not going to let their rights go away freely. They're going to fight for that power and to keep us as slaves mentally as much as possible.
Yes, and when you were saying that, my mind went back to The Falsification of African Consciousness by Dr. Amos Wilson, one of my favorite books. Yeah. And in that book, he said the laws are only good as if, I think he says, the people who enforce them, or they're only as good as if they're no good if they're not being enforced. Okay, I can't quote him exactly, family, but he was saying that they're no good if they're not being enforced. So you can have a zillion laws on the books, but if the laws aren't being enforced, then what good are they? Right. And that's what Dr. Amos Wilson was saying. And what we didn't start off doing, and I do this in all of my lectures. I teach at Morgan, and I always start off with the definition. I feel like we kind of just jumped into naturalization law and immigration law, right. And we didn't define it, right? It may be someone that needs for them to be defined. So I am going to go back to page 52 and define naturalization law. It says here, family, that naturalization law provides the process and guidelines by which one who is not born in the U.S. can become a citizen. Congress in 1790 determined that in order to become a naturalized citizen, one had to be white. That was an act of March the 26th, 1790, Chapter 3, Stat 103. Immigration law addresses those persons who seek to come legally into the U.S. from another country. And so again, in this chapter, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora is looking at immigration law and natural law, and to give us she's examining these laws to provide us with the understanding of how whiteness came to be. How whiteness was given symbolic immaterial value. Mm-hmm. And so that's what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Right? So let's move into nativism. I don't know if it's nativism or nativism, but I want to say nativism. But she, on page 61 at the bottom, she mentions John Hingham, and she says that John Hingham, defines nativism as extreme opposition to a minority within national borders based upon that minority's foreign connections. And she says that nativism sharpened the understanding of Americans as those who are Anglo-Saxon and Protestant. She says, in fact, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants came to be seen as Native Americans. So I said, oh my goodness. So, they created this concept of whiteness and created, through law, created this concept of whiteness, a human category, right? A human category or a group of humanity.
Yes.
And literally, they convinced themselves that they were native to this land, even though when they got here, Brother Everett, there were groups of people already here. Collectively, you had the mound builders who were in, you had the mound builders, the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippians. So they were already here with their own civilizations. You go down into Mesoamerica, you had the Olmecs, Mayans, and Aztecs. You go into South America, you had the Incas, right? And so there were groups of people already here, but these folks, they literally came over here, set up shop, Brother Everett, created some laws, and convinced themselves that they were the Native Americans.
Yes.
Now, how bizarre is that, brother?
That's crazy. That this book reminds me. It's a book by Dr. Claude Anderson. I believe it's called Black Labor, White Wealth. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes.
I glanced into it, and he's talking about the immigration laws a lot. Whenever I hear him talk, he's always talking about it, and I never really understood why he was going into it. But as I started getting into this chapter of how they consider one person an immigrant and how that whole, she's pretty much just breaking down how the immigration stuff started and what makes you a native, like you said, I guess that she's saying Native American, nativism. But yeah, how she breaks that down. And like you said, it starts off with those more laws again, breaking down who's considered a native, pure whiteness or Protestant. And she just goes in and it just gets deeper and deeper how they start excluding and putting people in classes.
Absolutely. And then she said, ultimately, she talked about industrialization. I'm on the bottom of page 62, moving into industrialization. And she said industrialization helped to then shape gender roles. She said prior to that, men and women were practically, they were doing the same thing. And we actually talk about that in the movie Buck Breaking, how it wasn't a such thing under the agricultural system. It wasn't a such thing when we were working. Oh, this is what a man is supposed to do. This is what women are supposed to do. She said that these, when we were on those plantations, women were doing exactly what the men were doing. We were picking cotton beside you. We were lifting things. We were doing what the men were doing. So it wasn't a such thing as really gender roles per se. She said that when industrialization came in, that's when you begin to see a lot of the gender roles, and she talks about that. And then I'm looking at the bottom of page 63. Now, I have next to it Buck Breaking, right? Okay. She says just as non-white men were excluded from inclusion within the construct of free labor, they were excluded from newly emerging expressions of patriarchal authority via a man's wage, right? Because she talked about that, how during the industrialization, there was this fight for men to be paid a certain wage so that they'd be able to provide for their wives and their children. And so she said, but non-white men, they were excluded from the inclusion within the construct of free labor. And they were excluded from this newly emerging expressions of patriarchal authority via a man's wage. It says the ideal of a man's wage rendered female dependence upon male support, which was a prerequisite in order for men to be real men. Further exclusion from the gender ideals of masculinity work to do what? Feminize, and as a result, denigrate non-white men. And that's exactly what they have been doing to non-white men. They have been feminizing them and also denigrating them. Do you want to add to that, Brother Everett?
Yeah, that pretty much said it all. I had that highlighted about the masculinity part and trying to feminize. But a little bit about that, it was just phenomenal research how she talks about the wages. She just breaks it down, and it's just ironic how I think the average white guy is 382, and it goes wheels down to Japanese made $1.63. You know, Portuguese workers and white people made 100% more than Japanese. So you can start seeing even those people that were free immigrants here, Japanese or whatever, that weren't classified as pure whites or Protestants, you know, they struggle with the pay rate. Of course, black people's pay rate was free labor. So that just really knocked us down a whole nother level. And it's just sickening to the stomach.
Absolutely. And so I'm looking at what you're saying, the pay rate. And again, like I said, this was just all of these different laws were just created to reinforce the white male's status of power, you know, his status. He was at the top of the food chain. And all it did was reinforce his position at the top of the food chain. But moving on to page 65, like you said, Brother Everett, there were a bunch of laws. Look at this. Even they started passing, it says 1882, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1907, they had a gentleman's agreement with Japan. And so to me, I'm looking at this and I said, wow, they never built America. It was really built from Africans, you know, but predominantly African labor. And then they used Chinese labor, then they used Japanese labor, then they used Filipino labor, but didn't want to grant any of the aforementioned people any type of citizenship. And again, like you said, Brother Everett, they just keep passing acts. In 1882, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. You know, in 1907, they passed, you know, a gentleman's agreement, you know, with Japan. It says under which Japanese government agreed not to issue passports to immigrants to the United States, except for certain business and professional men. So again, this is just making sure that they're solidifying and keeping his position. It says at the top of page 68, Congress passed the National Origins Act, or the Johnson's-Reed Act, that resulted in a more complete exclusion of Japanese among other groups. But they still do that today. Remember how Trump and even Barack Obama, I know you black folks get mad when you talk about Barack Obama, but he got in there and he played the game too, because we got to remember that the whole goal of the president is to maintain the status quo. So Barack Obama wasn't going to come in there and do anything that was going to empower any other folks but white folks. Let's establish that, because this is their structure. And so he was a mulatto face on a white power structure. And that's all it was. So when black folks were running around here expecting Barack Obama to do anything other than what he did, it just shows you how insane and ignorant we are, Brother Everett. But again, just going back to the book, a lot of these acts were passed to ensure that the white man was at the top of the food chain and that no other man was going to be able to take him or remove him from the top of the food chain. Do you want to add to that, Brother Everett?
No, you just said it all. I just wanted to briefly say, when she's talking about African Americans, Chinese, and Japanese, she just specifically says all three groups have been and remain firmly excluded from the human category called white. And these were excluded as a matter of law for the purposes of citizenship and excluded as a matter of everyday social interaction. So she's pretty much saying those laws are meant for those three classes, or at least back then, to be held in less regard than whites. And that pure whiteness, as she keeps pumping it up, is she's creating and building it up to be more than what it actually is as far as the color. It's kind of like she says, the ideology.
It is. It's a total ideology. And she says it's a total ideology in which she says whiteness has centered patriarchal authority and the power in the hands of white men. That's what it's really, really about. Yes, Sister Anusha, I saw what was going on and you know, in the chat, and he was doing a bit too much for me. He said he wasn't a troll, but he seemed like he was a troll, because I don't know anybody who interacts like that and they're not a troll. But anyway, Brother Everett, let's move on to the next section, brother. The last section, law and whiteness. Law and whiteness. So it actually piggybacks off of what you were just saying, white ideology. It says white ideology was built from the idea of those deemed sufficiently like the British has shaped U.S. history in profound ways. It has constructed American as consistent with white, and whiteness has centered patriarchal authority and power in the hands of white men. All right. But this is what I have underlined. I'm in the middle of page 67. Gotcha. And bear with us, family. We only have about 2 more pages to discuss. It says, as Ian H. Haney Lopez explains, the racial composition of the U.S. citizenry reflects in part the accident of world migration patterns. Okay. More than this, however, it reflects the conscious design. I have that in stars. It reflects the conscious design of U.S. immigration and naturalization laws. So she's saying if you look at the racial landscape, okay, or the racial composition of U.S. citizenry, I'm butchering it, but if you look at the citizenship or citizenry, if you look at that, she's saying that is due in part to people migrating, world migration, but she said it was largely shaped by U.S. immigration and naturalization laws, right? And then she says, of course, the U.S. racial composition of U.S. citizenry also reflects U.S. expansion and relational patterns. It should be highlighted here that the design of the U.S. reflected in part through immigration, naturalization, and expansion is significantly guided by the ideology of whiteness, including that white equals American. So what do you want to add to that, Brother Everett?
Pretty much what you said says it all, but she just to add on how she adds on political action, interpersonal relations, organization of communities, and racial ideas, not the least of which is that white constitutes a race. So she's pretty much putting a lot of things into whiteness, political power, things of that nature. It just makes you think, you know, it just makes you really, really think about where we're headed now and how we need to rethink how we're moving, especially politically and things of that nature. She's adding that all in. But also, she also closes out on 67, going back to the Dr. Ronald Taki, just talking about that experience in the cab ride. She brings it back in, saying how, you know, just because he might have been Asian, how he was viewed differently than maybe her mother would be as Italian, and how that has changed from when the laws first became created.
No, absolutely. And yeah, absolutely. And so one thing I want to say, and we actually, family, we're finished discussing chapter 3, but one thing I wanted to just say about Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, and for those who are just joining us, we're discussing Birth of a Nation by Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, an invention of white people and its relevance today. That's what we're reading and discussing. And we just finished discussing chapter 3. So if you missed it, please go back and check out the discussion. And like I was telling folks, even if you don't have the book, you know, like still tune in, because you can still learn some things just simply from listening to the discussion and even just participating in the chat. But one thing I like about this book, Brother Everett, is that she's very methodical. Mm-hmm. You know, she'll tell you, look, at the beginning of the chapter, these are the sources, you know, that I'm using to support, you know, my conclusions, you know, my inferences. So she's very methodical, very meticulous. And I love that she makes everything plain. She's a lawyer, but you don't hear a lot of legal jargon. I mean, she'll state some stuff, but she makes it plain for anyone who doesn't have a law background to just pick up the book and read and to understand. And so I really just appreciate how she wrote this book. And I love how she explains her methodology. So she didn't just write a book and just present a bunch of ideas and say, this is what I think. She'll tell you at the beginning of the chapter, right. In this particular chapter, we're going to examine the anti-miscegenation laws to prove or to give you an understanding of why this is so or why. So she tells you that at the beginning. And that's what I love about her book. But at the end, she says that in the next chapter, we're going to discuss Mexican people, mm-hmm. you know, and in chapter 4 is called Contingent Whites and In Between People, Mexicans and Irish in the U.S. And a lot of people don't even know, Brother Everett, that Mexicans are considered white. They're given the status white, when they come over here. They're
Yes.
literally given the status white. So here we are running around thinking that white is phenotypical, right? But is it really? Because these Mexicans phenotypically, they don't look what we would consider white, but they're given the status white. And so, I mean, I do have, I'm not a Morris Science type of person, Noble Drew Ali type of person, but I do remember when I was coming up, the Morris Science brothers used to talk about how white was a status and black was a status. And they used to talk about that. And we would say, oh, the boys don't know what they're talking about. But I'm reading this book and all she's doing is affirming what those brothers were saying about this concept of whiteness and what it means to be black and what it means to be white. And she also talked about in chapter 3 how black is associated with lazy, criminality. What else she say? Poor, uneducated, all of that stuff, and so this, so it is about status. When you say white and black, we're looking at it and thinking about it in racial terms, but she's telling you that it is status. It's status because the reality is there's no such thing as race. Right. All of us are Homo sapiens sapien. All of us, if you look at the genetic markers, all of us are 99% the same. It's that 1% that will distinguish us phenotypically from them. It's really 1% when you think about it. But go ahead, Brother Everett. It seemed like you want to get in.
No, I just can't wait to get into that chapter about the Mexicans. Oh, it's very interesting how they would. I want to know a little bit more about that. What made them allow Mexicans to be, in that whiteness category, which made them choose them? And I know it has a lot to do with population power, voting power, and things of that nature. But I really want to get into that because that's something I never understood, why they would allow them to be classified as have that whiteness come in. So I hope she elaborates on that. But I know she's going to be giving us a lot of details and more laws, that allowed that to happen.
Absolutely. And one of the treaties, remember, she mentioned was the Treaty of Guadalupe. And so I want to know what, like you said, what took place, because I'm not familiar with the treaty, but she said in that treaty they declared Mexicans as white, and so I'm definitely curious to see what she has to say. So family, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Family, don't forget to get your Buck Breaking DVD. Buck Breaking is out. Brother Everett, when I tell you that you're going to love the film, you're going to love the film. Now it's like 2.5 hours long, so if you watch it, family, please be somewhere where you're nice and cozy, you're warm, and your stomach is full, okay? Because I'm telling you, it's long, but it's a lot of really good information in this documentary. I have about 7 or 8 copies left that I can personalize for you if you would like me to. Also, family, get your Read Book Club t-shirt. Brother Everett, where's your t-shirt?
I'm waiting. To suppose he said he sent it out. So hopefully Monday. Yes, family. But look, brother Akata, he said, brother, rocking a nice shirt, African art. It's beautiful shirt. But family, get your Read Book Club shirt. Get your Read Book Club shirt. You can get your Read Book Club shirt from, let me type in his email address. If you're on Instagram, you can go to Hockey Customs. Hockey Customs on Instagram. So let me throw up his Instagram handle. That is his Instagram handle. Or you can simply email him. What was the best way? Did you email him? Or I went through Instagram. I hit him through the chat through Instagram.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and this is his email address because some folks, I hit him through Instagram all the time. But if you can't reach him on Instagram, then this is his email address. So get your Read Book Club. Get your Read Book Club t-shirt. Regain, elevate, aspire, and determined. All right, family. So join us back here, same time, same place next week. And again, next week we will be discussing chapter 4, Contingent Whites and In Between People, Mexican and Irish in the U.S. Thank you so much, family, for joining us tonight. Peace and Black Power.